with you all again this morning. See if we can get these slides pulled up. All right. All right, for those of you who are new here or who have not been here for the last month or so, during our adult Sunday school, we are going through the Sermon on the Mount, little by little, chunk by chunk. We're not going fast. We're just digging in and trying to understand what is Jesus saying to the people that he was speaking to, and from that, trying to understand what does this mean for us? So last Sunday we began at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus starts in with "Blessed are the poor in spirit." And we looked at what was typically called the Beatitudes, kind of as a whole, how they fit together a little bit. We asked some questions of the text, and so I'm going to hop over here to the next slide. I have it marked up a little bit according to some things that stood out to me, and also in relation to some of the questions that you all had. Last week I highlighted a few more things as I was prepping for this. So, where is my... I just want to say I was absolutely thrilled with the questions and observations that you all had last week. Right after I sat down, I wrote them down as best as I could remember, and want to go over them again here this morning because they're exactly the kind of questions that we need to ask to get to the gold of what is in this passage. So, not to put anybody on the spot, this is a positive, all right? So I'm just going to name who asked the question and say what the question was, and then we're going to try to touch on those as we go through it. Melody Slaybaugh, is this for now or for the future? When are these promises for? When are they blessed? Judith, what is the context and meaning of blessed? What is this blessing thing going on here? Kevin, some of the sayings seem to be about conduct and others about who one is. So there's an identity versus conduct thing going on here. Sean, how does kingdom of heaven and inherit the earth overlap or fit together? What is the connection? Is it same? Is it different? How do those mesh? Andrew Lloyd, who is mourning and why, and who is the comforter? Toby, the ninth blessed breaks the pattern of blessed are the for theirs. Why does it break the pattern? Sherry Yitzi, why is the last one longer and split out like that, and what significance does it carry? Jenna, why the specific pairings? Poor in spirit with kingdom of heaven, meek with the land, etc. Like why are they paired? This character or conduct or type of person with this blessing that they're inheriting or receiving. And then finally, Randy, what about the connection to the prophets before you is important or a cause to rejoice? Just want to say, great questions, really good questions of the text, and we're going to try to touch on a lot of them. I would highly encourage note-taking and following along where possible. Then last week, just to recap a little bit more, we also asked the question, is Jesus prescribing a list of entry requirements into his kingdom, or is he describing the kind of people to whom his kingdom is coming? So is he saying, these are virtues you must have to be in my kingdom? Or is he saying, this is the kind of people that my kingdom is coming to? Somewhat overlapped, somewhat the same, but different in emphasis, and how you interact with it will be different depending on which view you take. I would venture to say that most of us have been taught the first, that it's more of these are things you need to do in order to be in Jesus' kingdom, and haven't really thought about the second. So not to downplay the importance of the first, but I want to focus on and emphasize a little bit more the second concept of these are the kind of people that Jesus' kingdom is coming to. And I would say that kind of comes from Matthew's immediate context, the crowd that Jesus is speaking to. And these are the sick, weak, oppressed, under Roman rule, post-exile, Jewish farmers and laborers. They likely didn't own their land anymore. They were struggling just to survive, and they were paying enormous Roman taxes. They were desperately hoping for the promise of the prophets who said that someday the Messiah would come and make everything right again. This is why the gospel of the kingdom that Jesus started to preach is so electric and so arresting for them. Good news of a just and upright king is what would turn everything around for them. And then we looked a little bit at what does blessed mean? If we're going to understand what Jesus is saying, then the first word that we need to look at is the one that is used with every single one of the Beatitudes, blessed. So last week we explored this word in its original language. The Greek word is makarios, and even though Matthew wrote his gospel in Greek, Jesus was likely speaking Aramaic, possibly Hebrew, but probably Aramaic. Aramaic is a close cousin of Hebrew, and the Hebrew word that is in the Old Testament that is consistently translated to makarios in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, the Hebrew word is ashrei. So what you see here on this slide is just a few places where ashrei is used. 1 Kings 10:8 is the Queen of Sheba when she comes and sees all of Solomon's glory. And then she says, ashrei are your people, ashrei are your officials who continue to stand before you and hear your wisdom. Some translations have blessed, some have happy. The idea is something more maybe like how lucky, or how fortunate, or how blessed is a legitimate translation. It's just often we associate blessed with kind of more, maybe more than what this is saying. So, how fortunate, or basically these people have the good life, right? Ashrei is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. When you shall eat of the fruit of your hands, ashrei are you. So when you get to reap what you have sown in a positive way, like you plant your fields and then you are able to reap an abundant harvest and and enjoy that harvest, you have the good life. That's what it means to be blessed. Or it's blessed, I guess, is a little bit more of like almost like a third person observation of like, that person is really fortunate. They really have the life. Okay? And then we looked at this wildly interesting excerpt from Ben Sirach, which was written about 150 to 200 BC, so a couple hundred years before Jesus. This was a rabbi writing his version of what he thought the good life looks like, okay? I can think of 9 whom I would call blessed, or ashrei, and the 10th my tongue proclaims, a man who can rejoice in his children, a man who lives to see the downfall of his foes. Ashrei the man who lives with a sensible wife, and the one who does not plow with ox and ass together. Ashrei is the one who does not sin with the tongue, and the one who has not served an inferior. Ashrei is the one who finds a friend, and the one who speaks to attentive listeners. How great is the one who finds wisdom, but none is superior to the one who fears the Lord. Fear of the Lord surpasses everything. To whom can we compare the one who has it? So this is at least one Jewish person's idea of what the good life looks like. I want to highlight that this is in an honor-shame culture, which means the good life will look like being in a place of dignity and honor in the community and avoiding any kind of disgrace. For this rabbi, that means a life of practical wisdom, having a good wife, obedient children, a good reputation, honestly gained wealth, carefully guarded tongue, and obeying the law. Sounds pretty decent, right? Actually, it kind of sounds familiar to the culture that we grow up in. But this is radically different from what Jesus says is the good life. For Jesus, the focus is on the kingdom of God upsetting the cultural norms, and it is the poor, the brokenhearted, the outcasts, the persecuted who are actually somehow fortunate in Jesus' eyes. Wealth and high status are meaningless and actually are barriers to Jesus' kingdom. So, organization here in these 8 or 9, depending how you organize them, blesseds. I think the way that they're organized that makes the most sense to me is there's 3 triads. So blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, and blessed are the meek, are talking something about the social status of the blessed. The next 3, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart, are somewhere in the realm of character. What kind of character do the blessed have? And then finally, blessed are the peacemakers, those who are persecuted, and the final kind of big chunk there, again, persecuted, insulted. This is more about their conduct. So we're going to look at this a little bit more and see why I just said what I did. So the blessed, their social status is humble. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Poor in spirit. The poor is someone, I want to break this down, poor and spirit. The poor is someone who is lacking power economically, which affects physical and social power as well. We all know the wealthy person has a lot more leverage in a community, whether we like to admit it or not. And then spirit. This word in Hebrew, ruach, is all over the Old Testament. It is the invisible force and energy from God that brings things to life. The same word is used for wind, breath, a human spirit, and the third person of the Trinity, God's Spirit. It's all ruach. The ruach hovers over the water before creation and prepares to bring the chaos and emptiness to order and life. God's ruach is breathed into the man's nostrils and brings him to life. Animals have a ruach, the wind is ruach, and people give up their ruach when they stop breathing. So, what is ruach? It is life-giving force, vitality, energy, typically from God. So then, if poor is this lacking and don't have place, and ruach is energy and vitality, then poor in spirit is something like lacking in power, lacking in ability. So, a good translation would be powerless. There is a spiritual element of humility here, which is what probably, I'm guessing, what we've heard more. But it's in the context of those who are powerless and yet keep trusting God. This is a motif throughout the Psalms and throughout the Old Testament where the oppressed, those who are unable to help themselves, continue trusting in God that He will help them, that He will make things right for them. Scott McKnight writes, so there's the poor in spirit, and then the promise to them. I want to say here that there are blessings in these. Blessed might not be the blessing. Blessed might be more of an observation of like, how good is that person's life, right? But there are blessings. The blessing comes in the second half. The blessing is what is promised to them. And so the blessing for the poor in spirit or the powerless is the kingdom of heaven. Scott McKnight writes, the kingdom describes the fullness of God's blessing. Those who are poor now, who nonetheless trust in God and wait for God's Messiah with faithfulness, are and will be the ones who populate God's kingdom. The kingdom that has already begun to make its presence felt from the days of John and Jesus, but it still awaits a future glorious consummation. So this is that idea that we had, and we talked about a little bit of like already but not yet. And we see it all throughout these Beatitudes. The first one and the last one have, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Exact verbatim. All the rest are future. So there's an element of already, but a lot of the blessings that are to come are not yet. So for the powerless, they already are receiving and are already in the kingdom of heaven. For those who are poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Here we need to look at the Isaiah passage that Jesus himself quoted at the beginning of his his ministry. He says, Isaiah 61, he quotes from Isaiah 61, 1 through 3. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. This afflicted word is what we're going to see here in meek. Good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the broken of heart, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting. So they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. Isaiah 61, 1 through 3. The greater context of this Isaiah passage is the whole kind of event of exile, and Israel and specifically Judah and Jerusalem and the faithful, or so-called faithful, in Jerusalem being finally taken down completely, where Israel does not even exist as its own nation anymore, and they're taken into exile in Babylon. But then there's this piece here in this passage where it says, grant those who mourn in Zion. So what it seems like is this is after they've returned from exile, before or after, not exactly sure, but the piece here that is important is that we see throughout Second Chronicles as they return from exile, we see throughout the prophets that as they return from exile, that despite being back in their land, despite God having given back their land, they are still in exile. Spiritually, and the land is actually not theirs. They live in it again, but now they're just under one oppressor after another. One overlord, so to speak, after another. The Greeks, and then the Romans. And so they return to their land only to discover that Israel is still broken, still in exile, in their own land, and in their own sin. One commentary writes, God's own are on the bottom, the wicked on the top. So mourning is heard because the righteous suffer, because the wicked prosper, and because God has not yet acted to reverse the situation. The people of God have yet to see the kingdom of God in its fullness. They are persecuted, and God's will is not done on earth as it is in heaven. The righteous cannot but mourn until the eschatological reversal. It is not possible to be content with the status quo. To those who understand the truth about the present age, grief cannot be eliminated. It is, in fact, accentuated. So those who mourn will be comforted, and the comfort is coming from the hope that the Messiah will make things right again, and that he has already started to do so. And then the meek. Meek, this word I think is just simply unhelpful. Like, it's one of those words that got translated into the Bible when it was translated, I think, by John Wycliffe, like many moons ago. This was probably a helpful and relevant word at that time, and somehow it has stuck, and we just don't even really know what it means anymore, or we've heard it defined in so many different ways that it's not super clear. We hear meanings like meekness is strength under control. Maybe. But that's not at all how Jesus was using the word here. This word in the Hebrew equivalent of this word is ani, which is translated most often in the Old Testament as afflicted. Afflicted. That does not speak to me of strength at all. It speaks of weakness. So humble gets us a little bit closer, but humble still has like mostly spiritual overtones and not like actual weakness, like actual inability. There are a few times like where we read that Moses was the meekest man who ever lived or on earth, or however it says that. Somebody can think, even if they're not weak and unimportant, they can think of themselves as being insignificant. And that's kind of the context there, where Moses, it's kind of weird that, he wrote it, I think, and he's writing that he was the meekest man. Maybe somebody else edited it. But so one can be meek by thinking of themselves as having a low status. But most times the word is used of those who actually simply just have a low status. They have no power. They have no, it's a really close synonym to poor in spirit. Basically, unimportant. Your voice doesn't matter. Your perspective doesn't really matter. You don't really have any sway in the community. Imagine living in a land where your land has been taken out from under your feet and you are forced to continue farming and building up the economy for the benefit of wealthy foreign oppressors. The promise of inheriting the land is an electric statement for this crowd. But the blessing is paired with the gentle, unimportant, unassuming, meek ones. Not the zealots who are taking things into their own hands, running to the hills, fighting back, trying to gain back the land by physical force. Those are not the ones who will inherit the land. It's the meek, the ones who have no power, who are unimportant, who don't have the ability to take anything back, but who continue trusting in God anyway. To those, the land will be given. Note that it's future tense, will inherit. So it's one of those not yet pieces of the already but not yet. It is something that will be given them in due time, not of their own strength. All right, and then for the next triad, I think we're going to hit these yet, and then we'll pause for today and continue next week. For the next triad, their character seeks justice. So these are a little bit more about character. And what the character is about is justice, right relationships, what is right for themselves, for their community, and before God. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And I just want to, again, remind us, like, this word blessed, it's like Jesus is saying, all those people that we just looked at, those who are powerless, who are unimportant, who are grieving, whether it's the loss of loved ones or the loss of their land or identity, those are the ones Jesus is looking at, literally looking at as he preaches these words and saying, how good is life for you guys? You have the good life. So righteousness, right relationships with God, self, and others. Righteousness is another big spiritual jargon word that gets thrown around, and we're like, what, what exactly are we talking about? And it's used a lot throughout the Old Testament to depict justice. Justice toward those who have less ability than you do. Right relationships before God, before others. And I think it can be summarized really, really well in how Jesus summarizes the whole law and prophets when he says, and we just said it this morning, when he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. It's really critical that it says as yourself at the end. So it's loving God, loving neighbor, and loving yourself. If that's done right, you're righteous. Right relationships, doing right by others is basically what righteousness encapsulates. The Bible Project summarizes, to hunger and thirst for righteousness means that one looks out at the world and longs to see justice and peace, and is in a constant state of dissatisfaction when there is injustice. It also means that one lives in deep longing and anticipation of the time when God brings ultimate justice on human evil and sets things right once and for all. So hungering and thirsting for things to be made right. And I want to just say, things are not yet right. Like, the world is still really, really broken. And so this is for us. This is not just hungering and thirsting for a spiritual state of right standing before God. It is that, but it's a longing for the world to be set right. And they who long, they who hunger, will be filled. They will be fully satisfied. If righteousness is doing what's right by God and others, mercy, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Mercy is going beyond that and doing more than what is right, more than what someone actually deserves. The one Hebrew word that is kind of behind mercy is eleos in Greek. But the Hebrew word that is often in the Old Testament translated as mercy or whatever is chesed. Chesed. God's covenant, loyal, faithful love, no matter what. No matter his people's failings or faults or sinnings against him, chesed is God still staying true to his covenant to them. And so Jesus is saying, blessed are those who love and show mercy and go beyond what is even right, for they will also be shown mercy. Jesus really gets on the Pharisees for this one. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, so they have all the tithings and pieces of the law down, right? But you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. Then another place, Jesus says, I desire eleos, which is mercy. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus is called on many times, have mercy on me, Son of David. And he never refuses. He always stops what he's doing, is interruptible, pauses, and has mercy. And then finally, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. So the pure in heart, just it's like wholesome. Basically, the previous two kind of summarized, just like someone who is right with God, right with others, right with themselves, and they're devoted, and they're chasing after it. Their eyes are fixed. And it's those who will see God. So, like, nobody sees God in the Bible. Like, you don't just waltz up to God and look at him, right? But those who are pure in heart will see God. So Moses on the mount sees sees part of God, and he's like drastically changed, like comes down from the mountain and he's still just like reflecting this physical radiance from experiencing that close that small a picture of who God is. So those who have no contamination, those who are pure in heart. This is going back to Eden, where Adam and Eve walked with God. Before they sinned and before things were corrupted, they walked with God, and he dwelt with them. That's what this is all headed back to, is this place where God can dwell again with us. And on that note, I want to hop back here and speak to Sean's observation just a little bit. Kingdom of heaven and inherit the land. How do they fit together? What Jesus is doing is introducing and bringing back in his own body the fact that he is walking around on the land as God is like something that hasn't happened really, truly, physically since Eden. And so in Jesus and in his kingdom and in those who follow him, the kingdom of heaven, where God dwells, and the kingdom of this earth, where humans dwell, are being brought back together. The goal is not to be ripped away from the land and to go to heaven. The goal is for heaven to come to earth. And so in Jesus' message, in what he is speaking of here, those who are unimportant will inherit the land, and Jesus' kingdom will also be theirs. The kingdom of heaven will come and is coming back to earth. And it's a really unexpected crowd who gets to live in it. So I'll end there. Thank you.